Welcome to the NMI podcast. And this episode, we're speaking with Dr. Iain Hargreaves. And this is going to be a deep dive into the world of coenzyme Q10 and mitochondrial function, which is very excited about. I'll give you some background into Dr. Hargreaves and his academic career, publication history, research history, and so on. So he's a PhD and senior lecturer in clinical biochemistry and honorary consultant clinical scientist at the Neurometabolic Unit, National Hospital, Queen Square, London, UK School of Pharmacy, Liverpool, John Moores University, Liverpool, UK as well. And following his completion of a PhD in biochemistry at Liverpool University, he worked for Professor Simon Heals and Dr. John Land at the Institute of Neurology, University College of London here in the UK, where he was involved in the establishment of the Neurometabolic Unit, which specialises in the diagnosis of metabolic disease, especially mitochondrial and neurotransmitter-related disorders. Dr. Hargreaves worked in the Neurometabolic Unit for 21 years until he left to take up a lecturing position in biochemistry and clinical biochemistry at Liverpool John Moores University, and has retained an honorary consultant, clinical scientist, and senior lecturer position within the Neurometabolic Unit and Institute of Neurology, respectively. Is still actively involved in the mitochondrial diagnostic service. He's the editor of a important textbook, Coenzyme Q10, From Fact to Fiction, which was published in 2015. He's also editor of Mitochondrial Respiratory Chain Disorders, From Clinical Presentation to Diagnosis and Treatment. That's 2019. And is a prolific author. He's the author of over 160 peer-reviewed research papers, many of which are focused in this area of mitochondrial health and coenzyme Q10. So with that background, it's a great privilege to be speaking to you, Dr. Hargreaves, and really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. I thought a good place to start is to ask, a lot of your recent work is focused very specifically around this molecule coenzyme Q10. And how did you end up there? I mean, your background's fairly diverse, and what led you to focus on coenzyme Q10 specifically?
Yeah, well, I think I got interested in coenzyme Q10 about 1999. I used to work in London, as you said, I used to diagnose mitochondrial disease, disorders of the mitochondrial respiratory chain. And we had a really unusual patient in which we assayed the patient. We found normal activities of the respiratory chain, but the patient had a disease. And we found that the patient had a deficiency in coenzyme Q10. I was fascinated by this because this was the only treatable disorder of the mitochondrial respiratory chain. So I think this is the first reported neonatal case of coenzyme Q10 deficiency. We treated the patient with coenzyme Q10, but unfortunately there was some biochemical improvement. The lactate levels fell in the blood, but the neuropathology, I could say, basically deteriorated. There's no clinical improvement. So that fascinated me as well, because why, if we diagnose a deficiency in CoQ10, why can't you treat the patient? So I got into that. First of all, I was interested about, why CoQ10 deficiencies present so neurologically. Why is the brain so vulnerable to a coenzyme Q10 deficiency? And how does coenzyme Q10 deficiency affect the cell? Because the patients with these CoQ10 deficiencies have quite a profound mitochondrial dysfunction, oxidative stress. So I started working on cell models of the disease, got some PhD students, got some funding to do further research. That was really Ben. And why did that patient not respond to therapy? So I'll talk a bit about this later on, about how CoQ10 gets across the blood-brain barrier, the barrier that separates the blood from the brain, basically.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. And you can see that permeating your research publications, as you've really got that bridge between the biology and the biochemistry and real world clinical impact as well, which I think is, speaks a lot to your history in the field. And before we get into the details around clinical applications and biological functions and so on, I know you're also interested in the long history of CoQ10 itself. Can you share a bit about what it is and when it was discovered, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is a bit sort of a bit controversial, I suppose, but Well, what I've seen, coenzyme Q10 was first discovered, or first reported in 1950 in a PhD thesis from Liverpool University, where they extracted a compound that absorbed at 275 nanometers in the gut of horses. So this was 1950, and then they did further studies, I think, in rat liver, in liver of horses and oxen, I think, and they extracted this compound again, and they published a paper, I think, in 1955, and this group was run by Professor Morton, R.A. Morton. So as far as I'm aware, it was discovered in Liverpool in the 1950s. In America, a guy called, I think, Fred Crane, his group in Wisconsin discovered coenzyme Q10 in 1957 and 58, I think. So two groups discovered it, but I think Liverpool in the UK were the first. Not that there's a competition or anything at all.
That's
But I
interesting. And
think,
it's funny that you're at Liverpool and
yeah,
continuing this work that started in the 50s. Yeah.
it's ironic I brought it back. But ironically, when I was to do my PhD at Liverpool University, I didn't really think about coenzyme Q10. And one of the guys who was on one of the first papers was the professor at the time at that university. I
Hmm.
wish I'd got to speak to him, because when I got into coenzyme Q10 and I came back to Liverpool, he'd passed away, sadly. So
Hmm.
there is no real physical connection anymore, but I brought it back to Liverpool, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's really, really interesting. So I think for listeners, it'd be great to take the opportunity with you just to help us at a very basic level
Sure.
understand what CoQ10 is and what
Yeah,
it does
sure.
in the body.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the CoQ10 really has two main functions in the body. First of all, it functions as an electron carrier in the mitochondrial respiratory chain. It's involved in pumping electrons. So I should say the mitochondrial respiratory chain in the cell makes about 90% of your cell's energy. It's very important. And CoQ10 is an essential electron carrier in that chain, pumping protons from complex 1 to complex 4 and finally to oxygen. So that chain allows electrons to pump, so electrons to be transported, and that is required for oxidative phosphorylation and the process of ATP generation. So its first main function, I suppose, as I'm concerned, is its function as an electron carrier in the mitochondrial respiratory chain. It's also an essential antioxidant, essential lipid-soluble antioxidant, very potent lipid-soluble antioxidants. It's present in all cellular membranes, but also present in lipoproteins as well. So it's involved in energy generation and as and antioxidant status, but also it has a role in reducing inflammation. It can modulate the immune system. It's very much involved in loads of different functions. It has numerous different functions. If you go in, you read the literature, it has so many different functions. It's very much involved in the lysosome. The lysosome has coenzyme Q10 in the membrane. It allows the lysosome to be acidic. So again, it requires the lysosomal function. It's anti-inflammatory. It's also involved in the structure of membranes. Well, it gives them a bit of fluidity, again with cholesterol. So it has numerous of the. I mean, I won't go into all the functions, but it has a lot of different roles, basically. Sorry,
Yeah,
Ben.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, so it like energy production and a wide range of cellular
Wide
metabolic
range.
functions. And
Yeah, yeah,
I know your work is really focused on the brain, which you just touched on, and obviously has an important role in neurological health and neurological function. And also your work has worked on this blood-brain barrier
yeah.
transport as well. Do you want to take us into a bit of what your work has involved in this area?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was very interested in, how does coenzyme Q10 gets into how would it get into the brain from the blood? So when you're taking dietary CoQ10 in, how does that get into the brain? Well, the main barrier that separates the blood from the brain is the blood-brain barrier. This is a layer of epithelial cells, and this is very impermeable. So it's very difficult to get molecules across this barrier. Now, we know that coenzyme Q10 is carried in the circulation, attached as part, incorporated in lipoproteins, yeah? And lipoproteins, the transport of lipoproteins across the blood-brain barrier is very strictly regulated, because the level of cholesterol in the brain is very strictly maintained, and lipoproteins are a major carrier of cholesterol. So we did some studies about 10 years ago where we assessed the transport of CoQ10 across the blood-brain barrier by looking at how lipoproteins are transported. And we found some very interesting results. We used a porcine, a pig blood-brain barrier, because this blood-brain barrier is very similar to humans, has very high integrity. It's very similar to humans, unlike unlike other mammals. So we had an in vitro porcine blood-brain barrier, and we assess the transport of CoQ10 across this barrier by, first of all, incorporating coenzyme Q10 in lipoproteins. And then we put this on the blood-brain side of the barrier, and we measured the rate of transport across the blood-brain barrier. So we took that rate, and we did some inhibitor studies as well, and we found that CoQ10 is transported across the blood-brain barrier by two major carriers. It's the scavenger receptor and another receptor as well. I think I'll show this. I've got it written down. I do apologize. I don't remember this one on top of my head. It's my glasses on. It's the RAGE receptor as well, the RAGE receptor. So CoQ10 is transported across the blood-brain barrier by a scavenger receptor and a RAGE receptor. This is a receptor-mediated transport. So CoQ10 binds the receptor. The receptor then takes CoQ10 into the epithelial cells, and CoQ10 is transported then across the epithelial cells in a vesicle, then released on the brain side of the barrier, or the basal side of the barrier. Okay, so CoQ10 is transported by two sorts of receptors. But we also did some studies where we assessed the transport of CoQ10 from the brain side of the barrier to the blood side. And we found that the only transporter really involved in that was a low-density lipoprotein transporter. Okay, so CoQ10 is transported across the barrier by the RAGE transporter and the scavenger transporter, but then is effluxed across the brain, from the brain side to the blood by the lipoprotein transporter, low-density lipoprotein transporter. But we found that the rate of transport of the low-density lipoprotein transporter was equal to the intake of CoQ10. So the efflux of CoQ10 out of the barrier was matched by the CoQ10 going in. So we found that basically CoQ10, although it was taken in, although it passed through the barrier, as soon as it got across the barrier, it was immediately transported out. So under normal conditions, in this in vitro model, it appears that CoQ10 does cross the barrier, but is effluxed almost immediately. So there was no overall gain in CoQ10, no overall transport of CoQ10 across the barrier. Sorry, Ben, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And what relevance does that have to neurological health? And I know you've worked in areas like Parkinson's and so on. So,
Definitely.
what are the implications of this discovery?
Well, that's under normal conditions, but if you make the blood-brain barrier deficient in CoQ10, we could do this by adding an inhibitor of CoQ10 biosynthesis known as paraminobenzoate. It's a competitive inhibitor of CoQ10 biosynthesis. So we made the barrier 50% deficient in coenzyme Q10. So we decreased the level of coenzyme Q10 by 50%. And we found that the barrier loses its integrity, it becomes leaky. And we found that under those conditions, CoQ10 actually passed across the barrier. More CoQ10 passed across the barrier than was effluxed. So if your barrier is slightly deficient in CoQ10, you start taking CoQ10 up. Yeah?
Interesting.
And a lot of these neurological disorders, such as Parkinson's disease, even Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis, there is some link with the deficiency in coenzyme Q10. So under certain circumstances, CoQ10 may be able to get across the blood-brain barrier. But we found that if you made the blood-brain barrier repleting CoQ10 again, so if you supplement the barrier with if you supplement the CoQ10 deficient barrier with CoQ10, the barrier restores itself again and restores its integrity. So CoQ10 no longer passes across the barrier. There's like a period, I suppose, like a window of opportunity when the barrier is dysfunctional that CoQ10 will pass into the brain. But once that barrier is restored, CoQ10 no longer crosses.
Does that have that makes sense. And does that have implications for the therapeutic use of CoQ10 in neurology?
I think it does, because as I said before, with those patients with neurological presentations of CoQ10, some patients respond, some don't. And I wonder whether it's a result of the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. Certain conditions, certain mitochondrial disease, certain CoQ10 deficiencies cause the blood-brain barrier to be depleting CoQ10, and therefore it's leaky. And obviously, I'm sure if you treat the patient, there is some improvement. But I think once the barrier becomes repleting CoQ10, maybe the barrier becomes impermeable again. So maybe there is a slight improvement, then maybe it stabilizes a bit.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so it could certainly help explain different responses in therapy to different people and different diseases and so on.
Definitely, yeah. Because we all have different levels of CoQ10. And some people, healthy people, have very low levels. Some people are more repleted. It varies. So maybe more people are more sensitive. Some people aren't, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it makes sense. You're beyond these this mechanistic understanding, you've more broadly spent a lot of time looking at both primary and secondary
Mm,
CoQ10 deficiency. And I think a lot of our listeners will be more familiar, whether they know what the classification means or not, with secondary deficiency.
yeah.
But can you talk us through the difference between what primary and secondary deficiencies are?
Yeah, sure. Well, primary deficiency basically is a genetic deficiency in the CoQ10 biosynthetic pathway. Basically the mevalonate pathway. You get deficiency in one of the enzymes involved in that pathway. Okay. And I think since 2004, mutations in 10 genes have been associated with a primary coenzyme Q10 deficiency. So these are defects in the enzymes involved in CoQ10 biosynthesis. I
Mm,
should say coenzyme Q10 isn't a vitamin. We can synthesize it ourselves. So any cell that has mitochondria can make CoQ10 apart from red blood cells, and they get it from the diet probably.
mm,
So basically, a primary deficiency is a defect in the CoQ10 biosynthetic pathway, which hasn't fully been elucidated as yet even.
mm,
Secondary deficiencies are very interesting. They really are very interesting. And I mean, that's one of my interests at the moment because we don't actually know what is causing these deficiencies in numerous diseases. So basically, a secondary deficiency is a defect in CoQ10 biosynthesis that isn't involved, it isn't caused by a defect in the CoQ10 biosynthetic pathway. It's a secondary factor associated with disease, basically. It can be caused by oxidative stress. A lot of it's caused by oxidative stress, increased catabolism possibly, but we don't know. We're not sure. It's numerous different things. It could be feedback inhibition. If your mitochondria are defective, maybe you don't need to make as much CoQ10 and therefore it depletes.
mm.
All these different factors come into. So, Ben, this is an area, a not controversial area, but an area of a lot of research. That requires a lot more research, I think.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'd never really thought about it like that. I'm nowhere near as familiar with the literature as you, but when you look at like CoQ10 deficiency in certain
Yeah,
pathologies, no one's really asking why. It's just an observation that it
that's it.
exists.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But but I think that's a important point you've raised. I think if you're deficient in CoQ10, you're going to respond to it.
Mm,
And we don't really, in the NHS, I mean, there is one place in London that measures coenzyme Q10 in the patients, but we don't measure it in a lot of diseases. And if we found evidence of a slight deficiency or a marginal deficiency or even more profound deficiency, those patients would respond to supplementation, I think. But
yeah.
it's not assessed in a lot of diseases.
Yeah. Can we talk through assessment a bit? So on one hand, we've got the assessment of CoQ10 deficiency in a primary uh,
Yeah.
presentation, but then we've also got, secondary deficiency as well,
Yeah.
which I assume the way we assess these is quite different.
Yeah, I think with secondary deficiencies, we don't want to stress the patient. So it's got to be a low invasive method of assessing CoQ10.
Yeah.
And we found that a good way of assessing systemic coenzyme Q10 levels is to isolate blood mononuclear cells from whole blood. And we found there's a very good correlation between blood mononuclear cells and muscle CoQ10.
Mm,
So you take a blood sample, isolate the blood mononuclear cells, and you can measure the level of coenzyme Q10 in those cells. And we have a reference range, and we have used that to diagnose patients with coenzyme Q10 deficiencies, primary or secondary. People use plasma. A lot of people use plasma, which is great. But we found a lot of other people have found that the level of CoQ10 in plasma doesn't doesn't correlate very well with muscle or cells.
mm,
CoQ10 in the blood, in the plasma, basically it's a combination of two factors. It's due to liver synthesis, and it's also due to diet. I think 25%, up to 25% of CoQ10 in your plasma is dietary.
mm.
The rest comes in liver synthesis. So it doesn't always, if you try and correlate the level in muscle and the level in plasma from the same patients, it'd be a very, very skewed relationship.
Mm.
I've seen that. I think other people have reported that as well.
Yeah, interesting. So they're very different things because the contribution of CoQ10 from diet is minimal, as what I understand, and
Yeah,
especially versus physiological need. And
that's
so
it.
it doesn't sound particularly useful clinically, whereas the blood mononuclear cells is,
It's more, yeah,
yeah, is
endogenous,
more
yeah.
a bit more reflective of what's going on in physiology. Yeah.
Definitely. And I've seen studies where they've measured levels of CoQ10 in sports people who run a marathon or run sprinted, and the level of CoQ10 goes down because it's been taken up by the cells. So obviously you've got to be very careful when you measure it. And has the patient been ambulant? Has the patient been sitting down? All this, in fact, a lot of different factors can affect this. And obviously age, gender, muscle mass, all these things can affect it, can
Uh,
affect the
in,
level in plasma.
yeah, interesting. So beyond testing, what are some, I mean, you're really involved in all of this, and I'll link listeners to some of your recent reviews and papers, but beyond testing and understanding a bit of the biology of CoQ10, what clinically is associated with CoQ10 deficiency and also might respond to CoQ10 therapy? What are the big areas that are being explored at the moment?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are interested in chronic fatigue syndrome and treating patients with coenzyme Q10, try and boost, because chronic fatigue syndrome obviously has lots of different factors, but it has been associated with oxidative stress, underlying mitochondrial dysfunction. And there have been a few trials that I've seen, sort of, I think, open label trials and random trials, random studies, where they've shown evidence of a benefit, some increase in reduction in fatigue, increase in alertness.
Hmm.
So obviously, chronic fatigue is a very interesting study. I think even I think there's been stuff with COVID as well, so post-COVID syndromes as well, where again there's a viral factor, there's a fatigue, and there's been some studies using CoQ10. Some have been shown some benefit, some haven't shown benefit.
Yeah. And
Sorry, Ben.
no, I was going to say, looking at your publications too, you have worked on post-COVID viral fatigue
Yeah.
syndrome, which has similarities to CFS and but also Lyme disease as well. Is there a crossover there? And uh,
I think with Lyme disease you get the inflammation as well. I think inflammation even is very important because CoQ10 has that ability to reduce inflammation.
mhm,
And inflammation causes oxidative stress. Oxidative stress can damage mitochondria. So anything that can ameliorate the oxidative stress or the inflammation is going to be beneficial, I think.
yeah,
It's like aging as well. Aging, your mitochondria become less efficient. You produce more oxidative stress. The CoQ10 may have some benefit. Reducing oxidative stress, increasing mitochondrial function.
yeah, that makes sense. And but on the theme of CFS, I think there's also been some work in fibromyalgia syndrome as well. What do we know about the use of CoQ10 there?
Yeah, as what I sort of studied recently about, I think it's maybe it's about 6-7 years ago, where they found it reduced the pain threshold as well, and
Mm,
again had some positive effects on fatigue. But the patients were less susceptible to the pain induced in that condition. I think so. There was some benefits, but again, how the CoQ10 manifested those benefits again, it's uncertain as far as I'm aware.
yeah, no, that
I
makes
think the
sense.
important thing, Ben, is also the redox state of coenzyme Q10. There's a lot of controversy about this. Should you take oxidized coenzyme Q10 or reduced ubiquinol? Again, there's a lot of. I went to a meeting in Denmark. I had a CoQ10 association meeting, and I was doing a talk about CoQ10, and there was so much aggression, so much controversy about this because I was saying, well, ubiquinol, if you buy the reduced form of coenzyme Q10, it's expensive. You buy the oxidized form, it's a lot cheaper. But if you take CoQ10 it goes basically, you take it, it goes in the stomach, and all the CoQ10 reduced or oxidized is oxidized in the stomach by the gastric conditions of the gut. Yeah, it then passes into the small intestine. CoQ10 is absorbed in the small intestine in the ileum, I think, the enterocytes of the ileum. Then it's passed into the bile. It's incorporated in the chylomicrons in the endothelial, in the enterocytes, passed into the bile, and during that passage into the bile, all the CoQ10 is reduced to ubiquinol. So, so I don't think the redox state of CoQ10 affects its absorption. I think maybe it's a matrix. It's a taken. If you take
Mm,
CoQ10 in certain oil capsules, they say soya oil is quite a good matrix for CoQ10. It seems to studies have shown that has a better uptake, but again, there's a lot more work is required. But I think the redox state is a controversial matter. And I'm sure people will disagree with me, but personally, I don't think the redox state matters so much. I think it's the matrix CoQ10 is taken in.
yeah,
Sorry, Ben, I'm going off a tangent.
no, it's great. Tangents are good. It's a really good insight, and it is a question that comes up a lot clinically for people who are using this because,
Yeah,
as you're right, there's a lot of strongly opinionated sort of
yeah,
this side or that side. I'm not sure why
definitely.
exactly, but it's nice to, hear that from you. It will help people navigate things for sure. And yeah, no, certainly the delivery system does seem to be a factor, but I also have seen some data to suggest just taking it with food will
Yeah,
mimic essentially lipid emulsion.
definitely. Yeah, a lot of fats or lipids enhance the uptake. Yeah, in the chylomicron, sorry, in the mycelium, in the bile, in the small intestine, help the uptake. But
Yeah.
also, I think if you take certain trace metals, I think selenium is very good as well because selenium is required for a lot of the enzymes that reduce coenzyme Q10. So I've heard, you're putting it better than me, Ben, but I've heard in the Western, in generally in Europe, in England, the level of selenium in patients' diets is very low, in our
Mm.
bodies is very low. So we're all deficient in selenium. Selenium is a very important component of antioxidant enzymes, enzymes that can reduce coenzyme Q10. So taking CoQ10 and selenium may be beneficial.
Yeah, no, that makes sense that they would work together. I've seen some support of that. And yeah, certainly micronutrient deficiencies are pretty
Yeah,
widespread, so quite
definitely. Yeah,
relevant for sure. Yeah.
yeah. A lot of things will actually, these are like cofactors or essential factors of reduction enzyme that can reduce coenzyme Q10 and other antioxidants as well.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Just while we're off on a tangent around clinical use and dosing and so on, it, looking at the literature, the dose of CoQ10 clinically can vary a lot
yeah,
from sort of an average, I would say, in like fatigue syndromes of about 300 milligrams a day to,
yeah,
if you look at Parkinson's, it could be 1200
yeah,
milligrams
yeah,
a
yeah.
day. So can you speak a bit to dose and pharmacokinetics and why we see this big range?
Yeah, sure. Well, CoQ10, first of all, is taken up in the gut. We're not sure exactly how what the mechanism is, but we think it's carrier mediated. Yeah, so it can be saturated. So CoQ10 is taken up by the enterocytes and the small intestine, the ileum, by a carrier mediated process. Yeah. So obviously, if you give too much CoQ10, you're going to saturate those carriers. Yeah.
Hmm.
So what I've seen in the literature and from experience with working with clinicians, it's better to give the patient small amounts of CoQ10 regularly. So, say for instance, a good treatment for CoQ10, they say that for primary mitochondrial disease or mitochondrial disorders, they recommend between 5 to 50 milligrams per kilogram per day. Okay, but I think that equates basically taking CoQ10 capsules, say 100 milligrams in the morning with food, and then another 100 milligrams in the afternoon. So if you're giving the
Mm,
patient 200 milligrams, divided up into two doses of 100, it'd be much more efficient uptake. You'll find the level in the blood will increase more efficiently.
mm.
But I think there's one thing I'm going to go on a tangent now. I think one thing is important. We give patients coenzyme Q10. Good, great, but why? What is the dose? What levels in the blood do we need to actually elicit some clinical benefit? Now, this is one of my interests, I suppose, because in that you mentioned some Parkinson's disease study a while back, and they found that there was some clinical benefit in early stage Parkinson's disease from the level of CoQ10 in the blood was about 5 micromolar. And in vitro studies as well, we found that 5 micromolars of CoQ10 treating cells with CoQ10 deficiencies or mitochondrial disease, you get some biochemical improvement, you get some biochemical efficacy. So I think it's very important to, even though you're taking different doses of coenzyme Q10, I think it's very important to measure the level in the blood and try to aim for a level in the blood of approximately 5 micromolar. It's 4 to 5 micromolar. You may see some biochemical or clinical improvements with that. Because remember, the level of CoQ10 in the blood of healthy people ranges between, I think, is about, say, approximately between 1 to 2 micromolar, an average level of a healthy individual. So you need to get a lot more. If you've got a defect, some disease or oxidative stress or some mitochondrial dysfunction, you've got to give a bit more. But I think
Mm.
a level of about 5 micromolar may, in theory, at least in vitro, has shown some biochemical improvement.
Yeah, yeah, no, and with a little bit of human support to support that. And it does seem that like testing clinically, like one of the values in that is aiming for that target and looking
Definitely,
at how
definitely,
that individual is responding to your
definitely.
therapy and really aiming for that,
Definitely.
that 5 mark. Yeah.
I think it's also good to, I know a lot of people don't do it, assessing the level, giving the patient supplementation, but actually measuring it in the blood to show that it's getting in, to show the levels, because you may find the patient's not taking it, or you may need a higher dose. Maybe there's a problem with the gut uptake or something. You may need to saturate that in some cases. So I
Mm,
think it's very important to assess the level in blood following supplementation. And it may take about a month or two to try and get a decent level. It's not a fast process.
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess we're talking here about um, not serum. We're looking at the mononuclear
Yeah,
cells.
mononuclear cells. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably the best way. You can measure it in. You can take a plasma. You can take a blood sample and measure it in the serum first of all, in the blood plasma to show it's getting in. But then you can check whether it's getting in the actual body, if the cells of the body with the mononuclear cells. So
Yeah.
taking a blood sample allows you to do two things. I think in the UK we only measure it in blood mononuclear cells. I think in Europe, in the continent, they measure it more so in plasma. I think in serum,
Okay.
probably
Interesting.
more following supplementation. I think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And just deviating back to some of the clinical uses of CoQ10, I think an interesting area is cardiovascular health, and
Yeah.
um, it it seems to be quite a standout area for clinical research. What kind of relationship of CoQ10 to
Yeah.
cardiovascular health are we seeing?
Yeah, there's been a few studies. I mean, I know there's large supplementation studies, but there is evidence that patients with certain cardiovascular diseases have an underlying coenzyme Q10 deficiency.
Hmm.
The cause of that is uncertain. It's probably a secondary deficiency. Maybe there's evidence of oxidative stress or some other factor reducing the level of coenzyme Q10. But a lot of patients with heart disease, heart cardiovascular problems, have been shown to benefit from supplementation. The most important thing is CoQ10 isn't a detrimental compound. There have been some studies suggesting it may affect warfarin, efficiency of warfarin, but a recent study disproved that. So again, this is a bit controversial here. But CoQ10 has very few side effects. So giving the patient as an adjunct therapy coenzyme Q10, as well as a traditional cardiovascular treatment, CoQ10 won't affect those treatments. It won't reduce the efficacy of these treatments at all.
Yeah, yeah,
And as far as I know, it will. But obviously, first of all, cardiovascular disease, you get oxidative stress. You may have an underlying mitochondrial dysfunction in some way. So giving CoQ10 will first of all reduce the oxidative stress and will improve mitochondrial function. So, in theory, it's beneficial. It's beneficial, and there have been studies showing the benefits. A number of, I know you probably know better than me, a number of large longitudinal studies where they've shown benefit.
yeah, absolutely. No, it's great insight, and it while you're speaking, actually, it made me go off on a tangent as well. As I wonder, you mentioned in primary CoQ10 deficiency, are just 10 genes. These are relatively rare
Yeah,
mutations. And I'm wondering if there's any, I have no idea of the answer to this, but I'm wondering if there's a genetic link to secondary deficiency, like things like single nucleotide polymorphisms, and
yeah.
has this ever been looked at?
I think there's interest in that, I think, but I think also that especially is relevant to statin therapy as well. I'm going
Mm.
to mention statin therapy because they think there's some polymorphisms in one of the enzymes in CoQ10 pathways. So the CoQ2 enzyme may make you more vulnerable to the side effects of statin therapy. So
Ah,
I think there is a link between this, I think, and secondary deficiencies. There is a, but again, it's a very grey area.
yeah, interesting. I mean, that's a great example because you've got an environmental factor that's driving the deficiency, interacting with genetics and susceptibility. So,
Definitely.
maybe there are other examples of like
Oh,
that with
definitely.
environmental pollutants, for example.
Oh, definitely. I think a lot of patients, a lot of people who experience secondary deficiency maybe have underlying maybe some maybe minimal levels of CoQ10, some sort of polymorphisms in the CoQ10 enzymes, or maybe have some underlying mitochondrial disease some way that makes them more vulnerable. Because I
Mm,
think with regards to statins, it affects approximately 1 in 5,000 people may have some statin side effect, which matches the level of patients with mitochondrial disease almost in a way.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great observation. And continuing the theme with clinical uses of CoQ10, let's talk a little bit about healthy aging and
Yeah.
longevity. If I take CoQ10, will I live forever?
Yeah, I think there's been studies in rats and where there's been, I think studies in C. elegans shows a beneficial effect. But again, I think in mammal studies, there's no evidence it will increase longevity. I mean, it may improve quality of life. I mean, we all know that as you age, mitochondrial function does deteriorate due to probably aberrations in the ability to repair mitochondrial DNA. Your antioxidant status depletes as well. So you're getting some form of mitochondrial dysfunction, not profound, not enough to cause any clinical symptoms, but you're also getting oxidative stress. So giving CoQ10 may improve mitochondrial function and may reduce oxidative stress. Remember, it's like a chicken and egg. Oxidative stress will damage the mitochondria. Damaged mitochondria will produce oxidative stress. So if you can reduce both of them, you're going to probably maximize your mitochondrial function and reduce oxidative stress. Oxidative stress causes oxidized lipids, proteins, DNA, and that contributes towards aging. So giving coenzyme Q10, I think, will enhance your growing old gracefully. It may enhance your athleticism. You may enhance your cognitive function in a way as well. I don't
Mm,
think it's a bad thing. But the most important thing is it shouldn't have any side effects. It shouldn't make you worse, put it that way. And a lot of times people do benefit from it. They feel more energetic. They feel more cognitively aware and more alert even. Maybe patients with maybe aging it affects the blood-brain barrier. We haven't looked at that at all. Maybe patients who when you're getting older, your level of CoQ10, they say it decreases. When you get to about 20, you reach your maximum level of coenzyme Q10. It's been reported. So obviously after that, it goes down. And maybe in certain people, due to other factors, due to other disease, due to other medications, the level decreases further, makes you more vulnerable to, aging processes. So giving CoQ10, in theory, in these people may be beneficial.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And, I guess a potential key benefit of something like this is more to improve function with age and help offset and prevent chronic disease. And, this really plays into, areas like Parkinson's and neurodegenerative disease and, maybe mitigating risk, at least potentially. And certainly there's appears to be some support for that for things like cardiovascular disease as well, which are, increase in prevalence with age and so on.
No, definitely. And going back to Parkinson's disease, I think you probably know, there's two clinical studies where they looked at the effect of CoQ10 on early stage Parkinson's disease. There was a small study where they found benefits and benefit the patients. There was some clinical benefits to the patients, but they did a larger multi-year center study and they found no benefit.
Hmm.
I think very importantly, in those patients, their patients were given coenzyme Q10 and vitamin E at the same time.
Hmm.
And there's been studies that we found out ourselves that vitamin E and CoQ10 compete, it seems. So if you give CoQ10 and vitamin E in a supplement, vitamin E may reduce the uptake of CoQ10 into the blood. Yeah, and that's been reported, I think, in 2 studies.
Hmm.
But we found in this in vitro study we did using the porcine blood-brain barrier that giving vitamin E and CoQ10, vitamin E increases the efflux of CoQ10 across the blood-brain barrier. So giving vitamin E and CoQ10 causes more CoQ10 to be released from the blood-brain barrier. The rate of release of CoQ10 from the brain to the blood is increased.
Wow.
So this is just obviously, I must stress now, my caveats are this is in vitro, it's a porcine model, but it's interesting that this Parkinson's study, when CoQ10 and vitamin E are given at the same time, there's no benefit. I would have liked a bigger study without vitamin E. I'm sure there would. I'm personally sure there would have been some more benefit, just
Interesting.
because of the competition.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, that certainly lends biological plausibility to your theory there that the vitamin E was negating the effect of the CoQ10. I think it speaks to a problem with supplements in general, where everything is thrown into one pill
Yes,
willy-nilly, and
yeah.
and we don't know what the interactions are. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think more work is required, even in vitro, looking at them individually and seeing them working together. Because you may find two work great on their own, but two together, the efficiency is reduced in some way.
Hmm.
Again,
That's
obviously there's a grant there.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, we've taken a pretty big whistle-stop tour of CoQ10, and I think something that'd be interesting to dig into just as a sort of some closing remarks are around the clinical use of this. You've touched on a bit of this already, is like the appropriate dose, blood
Yeah,
monitoring, being careful of nutrient interactions is an interesting one. Delivery vehicles, are there,
yeah.
and the safety. Is there anything else that, people in practice would need to be concerned about with CoQ10 when they're using it clinically?
No, I think the side effects I've seen are its effect with warfarin. There are some effects. It may reduce the efficiency of warfarin, but that was, I think, one study. They found another study where they didn't see that effect. Some patients taking CoQ10 may experience nausea and vomiting, but that's not dose dependent. And if some people, say 1 in 1,000 people, maybe even less than that, are susceptible to this gastrointestinal problem with CoQ10. But as you mentioned before, in Parkinson's studies, they've given patients almost a gram of CoQ10. These patients had no gastrointestinal problems; they were fine. So
Mm.
CoQ10 up to very high doses doesn't appear to have any associated side effects. Very few individuals may be susceptible to some gastrointestinal problems, and the effect on warfarin is debatable. I think at the moment the jury's out, but the most recent study showed no effect on warfarin, efficiency of warfarin on clotting.
No, that's interesting. I've also heard it anecdotally, people say that it gives them a lot of energy, so they're then concerned about, dosing it because it might be a stimulant. Is this something we've ever
Yeah.
seen in the literature?
No, I mean, I think it's CoQ10 is held in the plasma membrane or the cellular membrane. So I guess eventually the membranes will be saturated with CoQ10, and maybe then it's not being taken up. So I think with CoQ10, there is one thing I've all thought about is it could be a pro-oxidant. Giving too much If it gets into the mitochondria, obviously it's an electron carrier, but giving too much, it may allow electrons to pass out. You may get oxidative stress. And there's one study a long time in vitro where they showed that high doses of CoQ10 may increase oxidative, but that was a one-off study.
Yeah.
But I think the saturated, because it's saturated from the gut, it's a saturated, it's a carrier mediated process. It will be saturated. So you can take about a gram of the CoQ10 at once, and I'm sure only a small amount will get into the blood. So I think obviously, so I think the body regulates itself quite closely. I think so. Very rarely, I think you're going to get excessive amounts of CoQ10. All our cells are quite depleting CoQ10. Amazingly, our cells are very lazy. So you can just imagine looking at cells in vitro. The levels of CoQ10 are very low, and you can take about 3 or 4 or 5 fold levels of CoQ10 in the cells, because the cells just make enough to get going, to keep going. So there is a margin for taking a lot more CoQ10 into the cells without any detriment. For what I've seen under in vitro studies, we can measure evidence of cellular toxicity using an MTT assay, and I've looked at this, and I found that cells level of CoQ10 in the cells, say for instance it's 10 nanomoles per meg of protein. Yeah, you can treat those cells with a lot more CoQ10. The level can rise up to 500, 1,000 nanomoles per milligram without actually having any detrimental effects using these toxicity assays.
Yeah. Interesting. So extremely safe, basically.
I think so. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I think. I don't think the body would allow you to take excessive amount. I think you'd be saturated. I think your carriers be saturated, your gut carriers be saturated, but also your cell membranes be saturated, so it wouldn't be getting in. And it'd just be held in the lipoproteins, and they'd be degraded and removed.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I guess part of this is due to it being an endogenous molecule, so
That's it. Yeah,
it's something that already exists in the body and is well regulated, unlike a new to nature molecule.
that's it. Yeah, so very little side effects, as far as I'm aware, anyway. But
Yeah.
I think there's a margin for treating people. I think more studies are required to look at the levels in different tissues, because obviously in different tissues the level of CoQ10 varies in tissues. The ratio of the redox state varies in tissues as well. In the brain, I think the level of CoQ10 is higher, say, than the muscles, but it does vary between tissues as well. So there's no universal level. And obviously depends on the ethnicity of the patient, the gender of the patients as well, the age of the patient. So I think there needs to be more reference ranges, more investigations of CoQ10, the effect of age as well on CoQ10. I'm sure we know in animals, we've looked in certain tissues, we haven't looked in all the tissues, we looked in rats, we haven't done that much studies in humans yet.
Hmm. I'm curious too, we mentioned a positive and a negative nutrient interaction, with selenium being potentially positive and vitamin
Yeah.
E being negative. Are there any others that stand out, or are these the key ones?
I think from my knowledge, I think these are the key ones. Vitamin E especially, because vitamin E and CoQ10 are very closely related.
Yeah.
CoQ10 reduces the alpha tocopherol. It keeps vitamin E in its active alpha tocopherol form. So I think that's why the patients were given CoQ10 and vitamin E, because they work together. Synergistically. Obviously, given together, the uptake in cells may be affected.
Mm.
Selenium, I think selenium is very important, because obviously that is required for the activity of the enzymes that reduce coenzyme Q10 until it's fully reduced ubiquinol form. I'm not aware of any other compounds or any other vitamins that may confound the effects of CoQ10. I mean, when patients are diagnosed in the UK with mitochondrial disease, they're given a cocktail of vitamins. I think vitamin C, vitamin E, maybe not vitamin E, but CoQ10, vitamin B2, I think, because that riboflavin is a cofactor for the respiratory chain, things like that. But as far as I know, there's no side effects with those different. But then again, some of these things may be under reducing the efficiency of CoQ10. We're not again. That's something to bear in mind. I don't think, as far as I'm aware, it's been studied in any detail. To be
Yeah.
honest, I think
That's
we assume they're
interesting.
all working together, all synergistically, all you know. But I think maybe there could be some confounding effects, possibly, and
Yeah.
that'd be something to look at. We could do that. We could look at that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Another grant for you.
So you give me all these ideas now. But I think it's interesting. I think the main thing is that CoQ10, you take it as a supplement, you get it passes into all the organs, all the systemic organs. Whether it gets into the brain or not is debatable as yet. It's been
Mm.
shown to cross the blood-brain barrier in animal models, not very efficiently, but it does appear in rats. It does appear to cross the blood barrier. In rabbits, it does, but in humans, I think the jury's still out. To be honest, I really think the
Mm.
jury's still out. We need to do more work. We need more investigations to assess this.
Interesting. So So if it's not really actively crossing the blood-brain barrier then, or maybe variable from person to
Hmm.
person, you know, how do is there a way of
Yeah,
understanding the neurological effects that we're seeing? Could it be working in the periphery to
it,
improve?
it could be. It could be working in the
Yeah.
peripheries, or maybe it's just reducing systemic oxidative stress. Maybe it's affecting the
Mm,
blood-brain barrier. But there are developments now to try and get CoQ10 into the brain. There's a new one, I think, where they're trying to. Well, I don't know. Anyway, I mean, they're trying to use nasal sprays for CoQ10
mm,
because if you spray anything up your nose, it does get into the brain. It bypasses the blood-brain barrier. So they're trying to get some nanoparticles, some nanoparticle forms of CoQ10 that may be able to cross the blood-brain barrier. So that's been developed at the moment. There's also a compound, I think, 4-hydroxybenzoate, which has been used to treat in certain neurological diseases in patients where they've shown this is beneficial because this this is a precursor of the nucleus of coenzyme Q10, and it's been shown to pass through cells. I'm not sure whether it gets across the blood-brain barrier as yet, but it's a very small molecule, and it may be able to. So you may be able to get CoQ10 increasing in the brain by using nasal sprays or using precursors of coenzyme Q10.
mm.
There is, I mean, you probably know, there's lots of different analogues of coenzyme Q10. There's idebenone that's been talked about a lot. That's great. And we showed in this in vitro study it passes through the blood-brain barrier very efficiently. It doesn't need lipoprotein. It just passes through the barrier itself.
Hmm.
It's not carrier mediated. I think it just diffuses through the actual plasma membrane itself. Uh, Idebenum is great. It's a very potent antioxidant. It can transfer electrons from, I think, from the cytoplasm to complex further respiratory chain, but it's not CoQ10. And it
Hmm.
and it has been shown in vitro conditions to increase oxidative stress because it fits into the pocket in the respiratory chain and passes electrons out. So
Wow.
good and bad, good and bad.
Yeah.
MitoQ is great as well, another analog of CoQ10, but again, it's an antioxidant. It doesn't replace CoQ10. It doesn't function in the respiratory chain.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. I've seen it advertised because it has been
Yeah,
commercialized in America, I think, but
yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
understand it fully. So it's not a CoQ10 molecule at all.
Oh, it's derived from, but it only functions as it's only an antioxidant.
Uh,
It doesn't function at all as electron carriers, so it doesn't fulfill all the properties of coenzyme Q10. I'm not sure how it works on gene expression as well. I'm not sure how it affects inflammation because
mm,
CoQ10 has all these different properties. It's difficult to get it into the brain as far as I'm aware. But we're working on this now, so hopefully in the future we'll have some either nasal spray or some precursor of CoQ10 that will be able to get across the barrier and
yeah,
increase in patients with neurological disorders.
yeah, absolutely. As a closing thought, then, where do you see the future going with CoQ10? Are there any really big opportunities in research or in clinical medicine?
Yeah, I think the thing that what we're working on at the moment is obviously with mitochondrial disorder, with say for instance with metabolic disease, you get lots of secondary effects on the mitochondria. For instance, with you heard of lysosomal storage disorders, LSDs, they affect 1 in 5,000 people. But one of the most common forms of LSD, lysosomal storage disorder, is Gaucher's disease, which has been associated with Parkinson's disease. Some of the patients with Gaucher's disease develop Parkinson's disease. And we're looking into the effect of that on the effects of lysosomal storage on the mitochondria and treatments to try and maximize mitochondrial function. And
Mm,
coenzyme Q10 seems to be this is a very important molecule that can benefit lots of forms of metabolic disease.
mm,
So I guess
interesting.
sorry.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so basically, a secondary deficiencies, diseases that present with secondary deficiencies of CoQ10, which is numerous, but trying to look at these particular diseases, prove there's mitochondrial dysfunction, prove there's oxidative stress, and then see whether CoQ10 actually does, under in vitro conditions, improve the biochemistry of those cells of those patients, as it were.
Fascinating. So it sounds to me like there's a lot of untapped potential of, joining the dots between mitochondrial dysfunction disease and the potential therapeutic benefit of CoQ10.
Oh, definitely. And also trying to get the therapeutic levels in the blood, what levels do we need to achieve? How do we achieve them to get some benefit? So at the moment, it's very random. It's a very grey area. It's trying to bring these things together as well for treatments for lots of metabolic, not just mitochondrial disease, not just primary CoQ10 deficiencies, but other metabolic disease as well, and maybe neurological disease as well.
Yeah.
Once we get CoQ10 across the blood-brain barrier,
Yeah. Yeah.
which will hopefully will do.
That's great. That's a great vision for the future and, lots of work to be done. And, but, at the same time, thank you for your contributions. You've really made hugely significant contributions to the field of CoQ10. And on behalf of the listeners of this, I'd just like to thank you for your time. I know it's, really valuable, but we really appreciate you walking us through CoQ10, the biology, functions, clinical use, and also the history of your work has been absolutely fascinating. And then, of course, giving us a view of the future. So, really, really appreciate your time. It's been hugely valuable.
Thanks, Ben. It's been a privilege. Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.